Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor and pleasure to moderate this plenary session on the SDG means of implementation. The purpose of this session is to summarize the outcomes of the 3 parallel discussions held earlier this morning on financing for the SDGs, which will be under the in-depth review at the 2018 High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development. I'm not going to compete with all the audience here who is talking to each other. Can you please take your seats? Yes, thank you very much. As you know, a key objective of this conference is to strengthen the coherence and coordination in the preparation for both the 2018 ECOSOC Forum on Financing for Development follow-up next April and the 2018 High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development next July. Let me briefly elaborate on why our efforts, joint efforts in this respect, are so important. We all agree that there is a strong need for the mobilization and effective utilization of additional financial resources from all available sources, domestic and international, public and private, if we are to achieve truly transformative and sustainable development. This is why the Addis Ababa Action Agenda on Financing for Development is viewed as an integral part of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, including the 17 Sustainable Development Goals and their 169 targets. The link between the 2 agendas is further strengthened by the fact that the Addis Agenda includes all financial and non-financial means of implementation of the SDGs. The Addis Agenda also emphasizes the synergies across the SDGs, where progress in one will contribute to the progress of others. In addition, all SDGs rely on the progress in the achievement of the policy commitment contained across the 7 action areas of the Addis Agenda. Against this background, our objective for this session is to hear reports on the key messages that emerged from the parallel discussions at the breakout sessions held earlier today. These messages will feed into a summary of this conference, which will be transmitted to the 2018 FFD Forum and the High-Level Political Forum. Later, we will also hear the views of 2 representatives of the most important stakeholders, the private sector and civil society. Both groups of stakeholders have brought their expertise and leverage to the follow-up process of the Addis and the 2030 agendas. Their continued involvement is critical to the successful implementation of the SDGs. As you know, the first session focused on SDGs 6, water, and 7, energy. Synergies across these goals and with the other goals are clearly visible. Access to clean water and sanitation is a vital element to achieve many other SDGs, especially those to end poverty and to improve public health. Similarly, affordable and clean energy is a key enabler for economic development, but also for improving health and education levels. However, financing for the required infrastructure remains a challenge, particularly in many developing countries. The second session on SDG 11 addressed critical issues with respect to cities. Since 2007, the majority of the world's population has been living in cities, and rapid urbanization is continuing, especially in developing countries. Local authorities are at the forefront of the implementation of the SDGs, but they often do not have adequate financial resources to provide the necessary public goods and services. The third session was dedicated to discussing the challenges of ensuring sustainable consumption and production patterns, SDG 12, as well as protecting, restoring, and promoting the sustainable use of ecosystems, SDG 15. One particular issue here is how to overcome the lack of financial resources and other obstacles, and how science, technology, and innovation roadmaps can facilitate investment in these areas. I hope that the participants in all the three parallel sessions have developed some concrete ideas and interesting suggestions that can form a constructive input to the outcome of this conference. It is now my pleasure to first invite the rapporteur from the breakout session on SDG 6, Energy, and SDG 7, Water, Mr. Philip Turner, who is sitting on my left. Mr. Nicholas, you will be doing this? Great. So that was the last-minute change, which I was not aware of, but it's my equal pleasure to give the floor to Mr. Nicholas Craven. Nicholas, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I'd like to say a thank you to the Qatari government for organizing this event and for their warm hospitality that we enjoyed last night at the gala dinner. I have the privilege to report on a very substantive discussion. We had a full room and a very rich exchange of opinion and experience, and a very skilled moderator. So first of all, I also like to say thank you to the participants that engaged and supported this discussion. We started off with some very serious reflections and some sombering issues. We were asked to imagine if we were sitting in a room with the lights off and there was no water available. There are really acute access gaps, and when we measure these, the numbers are in the billions of people who do not have access to clean energy or to cooking, and billions of people who do not have access to water and to clean sanitation. And the impact of this, in both cases, we measure in the millions. Millions of deaths are associated with air quality due to a lack of access to clean cooking, and also millions of deaths associated with a lack of access to clean drinking water. But there are also many technological solutions available. When we look at the financing gap, it's been estimated around $600 billion a year needed for SDG 6 on water to be spent every year up to 2030, and for energy, it's in the range of 1.7 to 2 trillion needed up to 2030, again for SDG 7. And while this might seem daunting, the group agreed it is manageable, and it's manageable if we localize the SDGs and adopt an integrated approach. These are global problems, but they have local solutions. There are huge upfront investments that are needed, but the revenue we can generate, this exceeds the costs, and it also exceeds the economic losses associated with inaction. At the same time, we are racing against time. Climate change makes these issues more urgent, and the need for adaptation makes them more complex. It's important that we use a think, plan, and invest approach with a strategic pathway, using integrated approaches. Regulation offers huge opportunity for a large impact on efficiency in particular at very low cost. We need long-term social contracts that provide reliability and predictability, because this can enable private sector investment. Risk mitigation is important, and we heard a very good case study from Sudan on this exact point. We need to, and also Nepal, I should add. We need to increase investment, particularly in low-income countries, and characteristically, these projects have a long-term payback, and so the risk management is a critical issue. Stakeholder engagement is needed to help preparation and preparedness for the future challenges, and national governments must identify their priorities to allow appropriate sequencing so they can target their efforts where they're needed most first. And as a final point, it's essential for national governments to create the right enabling environment for private sector investment, and this must come with predictability. Thank you very much.
I thank Mr. Nicholas Craven for his brief, concise, but very comprehensive report of the outcome of the breakout session 1. Next, it is my pleasure to give the floor to Mr. Philip Turner, who will report on breakout session 2 on SDG 11 cities. Mr. Turner, you have the floor.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, firstly, good afternoon. As mentioned, the Sustainable Cities discussion, I think we had a very positive, full and frank discussion, and I would like to thank the local host for allowing us to have that, but also those who participated. I think the main outcomes I took from it is that we know what we need to do and by when, and that many of the technologies that need to get us there are already on the market. I think that this offers great opportunities to leapfrog development, notably in developing countries. But we really need to look at cities not just at a project level which has a beginning, middle and end, but rather view cities as systems, as initiatives that have a lifetime if we're going to realise SDG 11. I think 4 key issues really came out of the discussion. I think there was the need for policy alignment. We heard yesterday how national governments are aligning with the SDGs, but also this is happening at the local level. And I think this is very important because from the discussions, it was quite clear that this provides investor confidence that there is going to be scale of their investments in cities. So we can really see significant change. Secondly, there was a big discussion around funding and the need to be far more effective, but also diversify the funding sources within cities. And also understand the new business models which are coming along at this stage. But if we do that, what we can do is cities can deliver better services and cheaper. So the business case really stacks up. Thirdly, there was a large discussion around if you're going to do financing, you need to have supportive capacity building. And that is for financial organizations to better understand these business models. Also city officials to learn how to use these 21st technologies, but also how to engage citizens as well, to build their capacity to use, but also appreciate. I think the last key point is that we should really see cities as breeding grounds for technology and innovations. We're seeing this increasingly throughout the world of this, the scaling up of living labs within cities, which are testing and also doing research and development. But also they offer the opportunities for co-creation about how businesses, cities and citizens can come together and deliver better services. And I think really from the conclusion of the discussion is that the technologies should serve the cities. And really, we have to have citizens at the heart of SDG 11. And if we do that, we can make living in our cities better for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Turner, for your report on breakout session 2. Finally, the outcome of breakout session 3 will be presented by Dr. Michael Obersteiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sir.
Thank you. Dear Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, and colleagues in this endeavor to make the 2030 agenda real. We were focusing on sustainable consumption and production, as well as life on land. And we started with the notion that the data that we face currently is that business as usual is not a viable way to go forward, both in terms of material consumption and in terms of destruction of ecosystems. Although in the case of forest we see some consolidation, but it's by far not enough. We engaged into a discussion where we were thinking, how can we manage these externalities that are currently not really priced? And we came up with the notion that also some of the modes of production, which are currently not fit for the 2030 agenda, will have to be phased out. And we need to engage in a process of creative destruction rather than hard destruction in that case. So work through incentives. When we looked now at the finance system, we saw a window of opportunity where it's actually in our hands, because some of the new rules and standards are reinvented or innovated, in the sense that we can deliver a finance system which we want. So it's actually directional. However, when we look at current finance regulation, and we mentioned Basel III, we actually see that the current rules don't provide the incentive for investments on long-term solutions. However, there are signs of hope, such as mobile-based finance payments, even for infrastructure developments in Kenya. What we have seen also was that sustainable consumption and production is very good and necessary. However, it's not sufficient to attain the ambitious targets of the SDGs. We will need more science, technology, innovation, some of which we actually don't know yet. And we identified, for example, the aviation industry, which counts on new technologies to arrive, which are not known yet, however, are necessary in order to reach their target for 2030 on halving emissions from today's levels. What we also saw was that franchising of social businesses might actually provide the exponential growth to bring solutions to scale. And with respect to SDG 15, we were seeing that basically the externalities are not priced, the incentives are not there, mostly because the policy framework is not in place. So what we will need is science-based policy making, which in itself is also very science, technology, and data intensive. In the discussion, we were talking about the systemic issues of finance, basically holding in the end the performance of the finance sector liable, so to say, whether it will deliver on physical targets which are actually enshrined in the SDGs. Finally, we closed the session with a quote from Albert Einstein, where the notion was you cannot fix the problem with the same thinking that created it in the first place, which is a plea to rethink the finance system that it actually delivers on the SDG agenda as such. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Obersteiner, for your brief, concise, and substantive report. Now we are moving to the discussion part of our session, and it is my great honor and pleasure to give the floor to the first of the two speakers. But by the power given to me by the co-chairs to moderate this session, I'm going to change the order of speakers and invite Ms. Louise Kantroff, permanent representative of the International Chamber of Commerce to the United Nations and the longtime coordinator of the business sector involvement in not only in the financing for development process, but also on the 2030 agenda for sustainable development, to take the floor. So you see, I didn't only mixed up the presenters for the roundtables, I am continuing this tradition and changing the order of speakers for the non-institutional or non-state stakeholders. Louise, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed a great pleasure for me to participate at this very important conference in the lead up to the 2018 ECOSOC Forum on Financing for Development. As our chairman mentioned, the International Chamber of Commerce, which is the oldest, largest, and most representative business organization in the world, has chaired the Business Sector Steering Committee to FFD. And so we have a very long history of engagement with the global community on financing for development, from Monterey to Doha to Addis, and now returning to Doha. And this has been a journey of challenges, breakthroughs, and progress. And as the chairman mentioned, ICC has had the privilege of coordinating business engagement on the 2030 agenda. And for me, this was personally a truly wonderful experience, coordinating the business inputs over an 18-month period towards the elaboration of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And Goal 17 was critically important in terms of the means of implementation. And again, as being responsible for business engagement on these two agendas, it was critically clear that they were going to have to be interrelated. And Goal 17 opened that door, and a meeting such as this, in bringing the two agendas together more concretely, will ensure the success of the achievement of the SDGs. And if we look back, 2015 was truly an historic year. The various global conferences under the auspices of the United Nations, from Sendai to Addis in September to the passing of the 2030 Agenda, and then to the Paris Accord in December, these were landmark decisions, and the decisions that governments made at all of those occasions will in fact impact generations to come. And each of these agendas, in a very historic way, acknowledge the role of the diverse private sector in the implementation of all these new agendas, and calls on the private sector to engage as a partner in development, as an engine of growth, and as a source of knowledge generation and innovation. And today, businesses provide 60% of the gross domestic product, 80% of capital flows, and 90% of jobs in developing countries. More than 50% of the financing needed to achieve the SDGs could therefore be expected to be mobilized through the private sector. As you may know, after the launch of the 2030 Agenda, the business community came together and launched the Business Commission for Sustainable Development. And in their recent report, they note that realizing the SDGs presents at least a $12 trillion worth of business opportunities by 2030, with well over 50% of these opportunities located in developing markets. And this provides the opportunity to create some 380 million jobs. Now, the expectation that businesses will engage and the private sector will engage on the SDGs and the Financing for Development Agenda is based on the model of shared value, which focuses business leaders on maximizing competitive value of solving social problems of customers in new markets. And the assumption is that in partnership with governments, civil society, and other stakeholders, business has the power to bring solutions to scale and create real change on global challenges. The Addis Agenda emphasizes that private finance, investment, and innovation are major drivers for inclusive economic growth, employment, and productivity. The agenda calls on all businesses to apply their creativity and innovation to solving sustainable development challenges and invites them to engage as partners in the development process, to invest in areas critical to sustainable development, and to shift more sustainable consumption and production patterns. Nonetheless, as our colleagues yesterday and during the breakout sessions today, it notes that finance and investment is not always allocated to where it is needed for sustainable development, and that the impact of sudden surges or exits of international private capital flows can undermine sustainable development. It stresses the importance of policy action for creating a conducive business environment, and we have heard that both yesterday and today, and for incentivizing greater long-term investment in sustainable development. I participated this morning on the breakout session for goals 6 and 7. And I noted that many of you may be aware that today is World Toilet Day. And I mention this because there will be events all over the world today to recognize the importance of issues around sanitation. And tomorrow, for those of us who will be returning to New York and going into headquarters, there will be a huge inflated toilet at the entrance to the United Nations. And the International Chamber of Commerce is co-hosting with the government of Singapore, who actually is the initial sponsor of the resolution to create World Toilet Day, hosting a side event in which we are bringing the CEO of a small and medium-sized enterprise based in Atlanta, Georgia, who will be presenting the work that they are doing in India and the Philippines to turn wastewater into a source of energy. I mention this only to say that both yesterday and today, we have heard all about the importance of technological innovation, and there are huge opportunities. But again, it is about directing the private investment into least developed countries. And a lot of this has to do with Goal 16. Although it's certainly not a focus for this year, both the business and the private sector and my colleagues in civil society, this was one of the goals that was critically important to both of these stakeholder groups. For business, it was about creating the right environment for businesses to direct their investment into areas which up until now have been very difficult to approach. So I think that this event, both in terms of the breakout sessions and the opening remarks of yesterday, highlight both the challenges and the opportunities. I'd like to conclude by just mentioning a few things that the International Chamber of Commerce is doing to become fit for purpose, to be really seen as a constructive partner with governments and civil society in the achievement of the 2030 Agenda and the Addis Ababa Action Program. We are mapping out the 2030 Agenda throughout all of our activities. We have recently passed at our executive board a revised strategic direction containing some 5 pillars, and each of these pillars relates to these 2 agendas. And again, it's to promote trade as an engine of inclusive economic growth and responsible business conduct, to foster sustainability through business and have business lead to achieve the 2030 Agenda as well as the Paris Climate Agreement, to uphold economies to improve living standards for all, to promote the rule of law, corporate responsibility, and building coherent regulatory frameworks, and to encourage innovation, movement of people, and promote capacity building for SMEs. We will be working directly with our national committees and our policy commissions. In fact, we will be having focal points on the 2030 Agenda, both within our national committees and our policy commissions. We will continue to participate with the Business Commission for Sustainable Development, and we will continue our activities at the United Nations at the global level, both through chairing the Business Sector Steering Committee for Financing for Development and working with the United Nations in the first ever investment forum on the margins of the ECOSOC forum. And the United Nations, you may be aware, asked the International Chamber of Commerce to work with them to host the SDG Business Forum during the ministerial segment of the HLPF. And we have always included the feedback from the FFD work into the SDG Business Forum so that these 2 agendas can be coordinated. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you very much, Luis. As always, informative, strong, and clear. And now it is my pleasure to give the floor to Mr. Stefano Prato, who is the Managing Director of the Society for International Development and the coordinator of civil society organizations on the Financing for Development agenda. Stefano, you have the floor.
Thank you so much for giving me the floor, and thanks so much to the invitation to the Civil Society Financing for Development group that has been accompanying the process of FFD since Monterey to participate. Let me just make 3 or 4 points here. First of all, it's important to have a clarity on the context. And the context, unfortunately, is a little worse from what we discussed at the last HLPF. I mean, the latest figures of FAO suggest that there is a new increase in hunger and food insecurity. Certainly that comes from conflicts and famine, but also that comes from a worsening in the profile of vulnerabilities. Secondly, we continue to be fighting with a global demand deficit that is leading to a stagnating global economy. Signs of recovery, but not robust enough to be sustained in the long term. And thirdly, many believe that we are in a sort of a subclinical financial systemic crisis, in which there are signs, particularly from the debt front, but not exclusively. So this is to say that the context requires some serious analysis. And when we have discussions on solutions to be scaled up, we also need to reflect a little more on what we need to discontinue. So it's important in these kind of situations that, yes, of course, we focus on the positive, but we cannot shy away from looking at elements that we need to discontinue. Secondly, the SDG FFD nexus is very timely and it's critical, building coherence between these two. Let me look for a moment at the SDG angle of the equation and then at the FFD. So from the SDG angle, most of you are frequent travelers. So you know that sometimes the nearest exit is behind you. And I use this example to say that it's good to have a discussion on technology, but sometimes it's not always in the fast-forward looking that we find solutions. Sometimes solutions are also behind us. And this is certainly the case when it comes to some of the SDGs that we're discussing here. And technology, it's an indispensable discussion. Please don't get me wrong here. But at the same time, we need to make sure that when we discuss technology, we discuss it in a manner that is very closely interconnected with real economy, real socioeconomic policy discussions. And this is also connected to the implications of technology, particularly when it comes to the economic power concentration that very often technology also comes with. And if you look, for instance, in the food and health sector, the recent experience of mega mergers in which some of the technology food input markets are virtually not markets anymore, literally situations of monopoly, I think needs to make us reflect also on the, let's say, the dark side of technology, if I'm allowed to use that term. So looking at the SDGs that we'll be discussing here is sometimes more useful to look at the interlinkages. And there are a number of policy nexuses in which we find fundamentally profound policy challenges. And the discussion of technology doesn't need to generate a sort of a technologic euphoria that make us think that technology will fix the problem that we do not have the courage to confront in policy terms. One is certainly the nexus between food, health, identities, livelihoods, and ecologies. Because really food is all of these. Yes, I know it's a stereotypical here. I'm Italian, therefore I need to speak about food. But But in fact, it is, because food is about our identities, our health, our relationship with the ecology, is about our social relations, is about livelihoods and many other things. And when you look there, the challenge is much more policy than technology and financial in many ways. We have a food system which is an emerging food system which is increasingly making us sick and is increasingly challenging our relation with the ecology. But this is not the only food system that exists. Actually, it's a fairly minor one. 70% of food which is produced on the world is produced on 25% of the resources by small-scale producers, and only 30% with 75 resources by the industrial system. Yet, when we discuss technology and incentives, we largely talk about the latter. And we largely talk about providing incentives to wrongdoers, much more than providing incentives to actually those that are proposing new virtuous models, such as the agroecological approaches to production, such as circular economies and so forth. So it's interesting to look at the technology question in the context of these real policy challenges a little bit 360 degrees. Let me make a second example, and then I move on. The second example is the nexus between production, labor, and taxation. Technology is replacing labor at a much higher speed and pace than the growth of the service economy is absorbing. And I think this is a challenge, it's a policy challenge. And also this is challenging many fiscal systems which are based on the taxation of labor as a primary fiscal generating, income generating revenue for the state. I mean, recently there's been a proposal to taxing robots. I'm not sure this is what I'm proposing here, but certainly we need to start addressing in policy terms these nexuses. And this helps us to contextualize the technology discussion in the context of these multiple and sometimes opposing policy objectives in the context of a sustainable development agenda. So let me conclude with then the nexus with FFD. I think when we intersect this discussion with FFD, we need to be a little careful. Because if we discuss it purely from the sort of SDG entry point, we may have a tendency of thinking about financing first in a manner that may underplay the policy challenge. Secondly, may think about financing much more in terms of sort of sectorial and vertical financing schemes. And it's therefore necessary to balance it with another approach, which is the traditional approach of FFD, that of reflecting of what is the fiscal and normative space that nation states have to advance their sustainable development agenda, and what are the constraints to those fiscal and normative spaces that the international economic, financial, and monetary architecture generates. So one concrete way in moving forward is to maybe suggest to countries that are leading their voluntary national reviews to be a little bit more explicit in putting forward challenges and opportunities that they see from those international architecture to advancing their development agendas, because that can feed into the FFD with a very clear call vis-à-vis its traditional and original mandate as a Monterrey. But all in all, I think it was a very interesting discussion and very useful to have. My only little claim is to ensure that next occasions will see a much more robust, active, and pervasive participation of civil society, because I'm pretty sure that in all of this, there's so many other innovations, maybe not patented as such, that we could consider as we move the process forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Stefano. This completes the list of designated speakers for this session. I want to thank them all for their presentations, and especially I want to thank them for keeping the time limit. So they were informative, they were comprehensive, but they were concise. And ladies and gentlemen, as you noticed, we have already covered in this conference the selected SDGs for in-depth review in the high-level political forum. But you will also recall that SDG 17 on global partnership will be under review each and every year in HLPF. So the contribution by stakeholders focused on that SDGs and related issues. Now we have about 10 minutes for questions, comments from the floor. I deliberately restrained myself from making my own comments, although all the presentations were thought-provoking, in order to give you an opportunity to ask directly from the questions addressed to rapporteurs and the two major non-institutional stakeholders. The floor is open. I don't have my glasses on, but I think that with the help of the panel, we can see those who raise their flags or press their buttons for the floor. As I said, the floor is open. We have some 10 minutes for interactive discussion. Oui, monsieur. I see Guinea. You have the floor, sir.
Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président. Je voulais juste faire une remarque. Durant les débats pour le financement de l'agenda 2030, on a oublié une source importante de financement qu'on a communément appelée les financements innovants. Les financements innovants, comme vous le savez, ont fait l'objet d'un groupe pilote sur les financements innovants à l'initiative de la France, du Brésil, du Chili et de plusieurs partenaires africains, dont la Guinée, qui en a abrité la 5e réunion ministérielle du groupe pilote à Conakry en 2008 et qui a été porte-parole de ce groupe pilote à la conférence de Doha de décembre 2010 pour présenter la déclaration de Conakry relative au développement et à la densification des financements innovants dans la mise en œuvre accélérée des anciens OMD, des objectifs de développement durable. Je pense que par rapport à l'agenda 2030, nous devons retrouver, dépoussiérer, reprendre les grands travaux inspirés par l'économiste international Jean-Pierre Landau, inspiré et guidé par M. Jean-Philippe Douste-Blazy, qui avait fait des progrès remarquables et dont les résultats avaient touché tous les secteurs, les financements innovants dans l'agriculture, les financements innovants dans la technologie, dans l'enseignement, dans la pêche, le climat, etc., etc. Je pense que ces résultats peuvent nous servir de mobiliser des ressources additionnelles, prévisibles et utiles pour le financement des objectifs de développement durable. En conséquence, je voulais inviter les pères fondateurs de ces financements innovants et l'ensemble des pays qui ont abrité la réunion ministérielle de ce groupe pilote à se retrouver pour voir dans quelle mesure on va redynamiser ce groupe pilote de manière à trouver des ressources additionnelles. Car il faut ces ressources, ces financements innovants se trouvent à la fois au niveau du secteur public, au niveau du secteur privé, mais aujourd'hui dilué. Il faut qu'on le mette en évidence et qu'on exploite clairement les opportunités qu'elle offre en faveur du financement et du développement de l'agenda 2030. Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Guinea, and my greetings to the FFD veteran, because you recalled what was in the focus of attention at the pre-Monterey and post-Monterey years, the group pilot on innovative finance for development. It is still in the purview of the financing for development process. And thank you very much for recalling this initiative and highlighting Guinea's role as the rotating chair of that group. The next speaker is Uganda. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, for giving me the floor. Let me begin by thanking the government of the State of Qatar for excellent arrangements and for inviting us to participate in this important high-level conference. Let me also thank for all the panels for the great work and the feedback. Since we couldn't be in all the panels, it gives us an insight on what has happened and the interesting discussion. My question will be on the panel on SDG 6 and 7, water and energy. My question would be, it seems to be that there is a lot of investment in energy compared to water. Yet, from the time of the MDGs and SDG, clean water affects more people. So the question is, how can this gap be closed so that we have more investment in the water sector? Of course, energy is important, but also investment in the water sector is important. What can be done? What ideas can be concretely put on the table to increase the investment in water so that we can close the gap? And of course, the big elephant in the room being climate change and infrastructure development in the water sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Uganda. The next speaker is Palestine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And since this is the first time I speak in this setup, let me just to express the gratitude of my delegation for the government of Qatar for their hospitality and all of the outstanding things that they have provided for us in order to make this conference a successful one. And also I would like to express the gratitude to the United Nations, especially DESA, for the role that you have played in organizing this very important conference. Let me also thank you and all the panelists for briefing us on the different outcome of the roundtables as well as the private sectors. And I just want to say that I am so delighted to be in Doha. I attended the meeting on finance for development a few years ago in the same facilities, and I am happy that I am in this follow-up meeting. And also I attended the Addis Ababa meeting connected to the same subject. I think that the discussion in New York among all of my colleagues, and I believe the discussion now and the discussion in the past since Monterey is, and now we have the SDGs, Agenda 2030, is in one hand implementation, on the other hand providing resources to allow the implementation to take place, meaning financing. And these are the issues that we will continue dwelling on them, and without providing resources and finances, it will become extremely difficult for the implementations of the goals and targets and Agenda 2030. I believe there is a stronger resolve this time in comparison to the MDGs that we need to provide the resources for the implementation. And I think that when we collectively meet and negotiate extensively and reach agreements like on Agenda 2030, this is the collective effort in which we all agree those who are rich countries and those who are not so rich, that humanity require the implementation of these goals. And we need not to go after we reach these agreements to discussions of how we run our own affairs in our own countries, because if we need to do that, then we do it through our parliaments and our own institutions, and we don't need collective processes. After we finish the collective negotiations, we need good faith and decisions to allow for the implementation of what we agreed upon. And I think that we will continue to dwell on all these issues, and we will continue to push in the direction of implementation. For us in Palestine, our situation is extremely unique because we face the problems that all developing countries face. In addition to that, we face external influence, which is Israeli occupation, that affect all of our developmental plans in so many different ways, including negative ways. And for us, while we are dealing with that negative effect of our situation, meaning the Israeli occupation, yet in the same time, we are contributing in our own way for contributing to the implementation of Agenda 2030, whether it is in the field of finances or whether in the field of implementation and all the details of Agenda 2030. And we are grateful for the international community for helping us to deal with these issues. I was earlier in the roundtable of water and energy. We have a crisis situation in the Gaza Strip with regard to water. If we do not find solution to issues of water and all of the associated programs related to it, including energy and other issues, then the situation of Gaza will be even compounded much more than the difficulty that we are going through. And we are cooperating fully with all partners in order to find solutions to that crisis, especially in the field of possibly constructing big desalination plants and providing energy for that and providing resources. Again, I am happy to be listening to all the experts giving tremendous amount of technical information about the issues that we are facing in the fields of finance and also in the fields of water and technology. Thank you, and energy.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I have to draw the line now. I'm sure that many participants would like to provide their comments and ask more questions from our panelists. And again, without abuse, but given my power as the moderator, I would like to limit the answers to just one rapporteur from the first breakout session, Nicholas Craven, especially the points mentioned by Uganda and by Palestine. Nicholas, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and thank you also for raising what I think is an extremely important and interesting question. We did cover this in our discussions, and thank you for the opportunity to give a little bit more detail on those discussions. And so it's certainly true that there is a bias in funding towards energy by comparison to water. And when you look at ODA funds, I think energy gets around twice as much funding as water. And then when we look at the private sector and we look at venture capital flows into startups, we measure those deal flows in terms of billions when it comes to energy and millions when it comes to water. So we certainly recognize the importance of the question. And in terms of concrete solutions, our discussions we also discussed the low pricing of water, and this is one of the major issues. The fact that many utilities fail to cover their operation and maintenance costs. This has an impact on services, and it also provides a barrier to investment, a barrier to the private sector, and a barrier to innovation. And so one of the conclusions is to develop sustainable pricing of water utilities. And of course, this must be implemented with a pro-poor approach. And so what we're doing is cross-subsidizing sectors of society that are able to pay a higher price that reflects the true social, economic, and environmental cost of water, and use that to support the poorer sections of society who suffer with access problems.
Thank you, Nicholas. We have now come to the end of this session, and I have to conclude, although I know that there are many more questions, and I invite the participants to continue their discussions over lunchtime and during coffee breaks, and after all, we have the whole afternoon to continue the conference. But before concluding, I want to draw your attention to slight changes in our program for the afternoon. There is no substantive change, but we are gaining momentum, we are gaining speed, so the lunch break will be reduced from 1 hour and a half to 1 hour, from 1 to 2. The coffee break will be reduced from half an hour to 15 minutes. So that we can finish the conference by 5 p.m. So please pay attention to the revised program which was distributed desk to desk. Let us try to be efficient and observe the time. Thank you very much once again to all our presenters and to all our participants for the successful session, which contributes to the successful conference. The session is adjourned.